Welcome into episode 431 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Now, Bridget, Scott, and everybody listening, I want you to stop where you are right now and give yourselves a round of applause and a pat on the back for enduring what was one of the worst 82-game seasons of Boston Bruins hockey that I have ever seen, certainly in my lifetime. So the good news is we're moving on, right?
They finished with the exact same number of points, 76, as the infamous Dave Lewis year in 06-07.
And I'd be curious to go side by side their team analytics, but yeah, it was not good. So everybody can breathe a sigh of relief. We're no longer talking about this season, and now we're moving forward. What next year looks like, if it's any better, that remains to be seen, but there's a lot of work to be done. Of course, though, Bridget, let's go to you for the opening shifts first, because there were some things worth talking about in Game 82, some young players stepping up, and just there are some takeaways from the last game.
Yeah, and I guess to keep it just a little bit reflective, and then we're going to get into some forward-looking stuff later on. It was an opportunity once they knew they were out of it to get a look at some young players, and essentially, and this is something that Don Sweeney mentioned a few games ago on Nesson, just Joe Sacco having to coach essentially two different teams, and they finish out the season with two more call-ups, like we mentioned, Frederic Brunet and John Farinacci getting their first whacks at the NHL, and Farinacci ends up scoring. And so that was an awesome moment for him. And we talked to Pasternak after the game as well about how valuable an opportunity it was for some of these guys at the end of the season. And he said, this is new for me too. I'm not used to seeing like this be what the end of the season looks like, because usually they're adding at the deadline, they're making a big push. But instead, he finds himself in a situation where he's kind of coaching up some of the younger guys that come in. And, Fabian Lysell seems to have started to find some footing in the NHL and had a really nice assist in the last game of the season. So I know you guys were probably sitting there watching the game thinking, all right, well, the Bruins are losing. This is great. And then they start to make a comeback, and then they go to overtime, and then they lose in overtime. So they get the 1 point, which could affect where they draft. They would have been locked into that finishing fourth from last if they had lost in regulation. But now it depends on what Philly does tomorrow. So I feel like all the Bruins fans' eyes are on the Flyers, hoping that the Flyers win, which would lock them into that fourth from last spot, give them better odds to pick, higher in the draft, obviously, better odds to pick first or second, and give them less, or would cut off their chances of finishing later. They can't drop as far if they finish fourth. So, Brian, I believe that leads into your opening shift, because right now we are points watching until the end of the regular season, and then eventually in June we'll be watching the ping pong balls. So
Exactly. So there's a couple of different results for the Bruins now that their season is completely over. There's still
ping pong balls will be in May, by the way. So
May,
only like a couple weeks.
Yeah, we're not that far away from it. Brian, I think you tweeted out the date.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a specific date for the lottery, at least publicly, but I do think that Google AI said early May. So they're probably pulling from previous years.
Yeah, and as we know, Google AI is perfect. Never gets anything wrong.
Yeah, never wrong. But yeah, you have the lottery, and
I feel like Google AI is wrong like on 80% of the searches I run. Like I in fact, it might be 100%. Like I don't know if it's ever been right.
Yeah, I think the rumor going around town is that Don Sweeney used Google AI to see if Elias Lindholm was a 1C last summer, but I guess that one was wrong too. But yeah, no, I'm joking. So yes, there's a draft lottery in May. The draft is June 27th and 28th. Free agency, I think, is July 1st. And there's a lot of other dates too. But yes, so Bridget, to your point, there are two results remaining for the Bruins, despite their season being over. So, and a lot of you out there may very well know how the draft works, that there's a lottery and you might know the details of it, but there's probably many of you out there that might not realize that. And again, the Bruins haven't been in this situation where we're lottery watching, so maybe people haven't been paying attention. But I've had people comment to me online, if the Bruins finish 29th, aren't they picking fourth? And it's a fair question, but not exactly. They would have the fourth best odds to win the lottery. So I'll just read off what the Bruins scenarios are. Boston would draft with the fourth best odds. They would finish 29th if the Flyers get 1 point in their last game. Okay, so they just need Philly to get 1 point in game 82. In that situation, the Bruins would have a 9.5% chance of finishing first, drafting second. They'd have a 0.3% chance of drafting third, a 15.4% chance of drafting fourth, right? So when people say, if they finish 29th, aren't they picking fourth? Nope. They have a 15.4% chance of keeping the fourth pick, 44.6% chance of drafting fifth, 20.8% chance of drafting sixth, and that's the lowest the Bruins can draft. So if Philly gets 1 point tonight, the Bruins can draft as high as first or as low as sixth. If the Flyers lose in regulation, the Bruins would have the fifth best odds of winning the lottery, and they can draft as low as seventh. And those odds are 8.5% chance of drafting first, 8.6% chance of drafting second, 0.3% chance of drafting third, 0% chance of drafting fourth, 24.5% chance of drafting fifth, 44% chance of drafting sixth, 14.2% chance of drafting seventh, and no chance of drafting eighth. So that's what's at stake tonight or tomorrow.
Thursday, yeah.
When the Flyers play, it's not a crazy difference one way or the other. Of course, finishing 29th, the odds are a little bit better, but it's not drastic either way. They're locked into, at the very worst case scenario, drafting seventh overall in the draft. That's worst case for the Bruins at this stage.
Yeah, and we'll get into that because, like, I'm increasingly starting to think that even if you drop to 7, it's not really that big of a deal. There's been I would say some blurring of lines when it comes to tiers that we can get into with some recent rankings. My opening shift is about the news / no news of Wednesday morning, which came in the form of a statement from Charlie Jacobs, a statement that was issued through the Bruins, and then also an interview that Charlie Jacobs gave to the Boston Globe to Jim McBride, where, you know, I'm not going to read the full statement because it's long. I'm also not going to read all his comments to the Globe because those are even longer. But the gist of it is that there are not going to be any changes to the two biggest posts below Charlie Jacobs, and that is, of course, team president Cam Neely and general manager Don Sweeney. The statement does not mention them by name, but does say, together with our hockey operations leaders, we are actively preparing for the NHL draft and anticipate a top-tier selection with more draft capital in hand than we have had in recent years. He also adds, together with leadership, we are embarking on an ambitious journey to restore glory to this great franchise. In the interview with Jim McBride of the Globe, Charlie Jacobs is asked about Sweeney and Neely by name and makes it much clearer that they're not going anywhere. At one point, he says, and lost my place on the story. He says, it's hard for me to wrap my head around why people call for their heads, referring to Neely and Sweeney. And this is in line with what we've heard from Charlie Jacobs all along, which is, at least publicly, he has unwavering belief in Cam Neely and Don Sweeney. And it doesn't seem like that's been shaken. Now, what's also interesting from these comments is he calls it a retool. He says it's not a rebuild. So in my mind, that places some sort of timeline on this. What exactly that timeline is, we don't know. Maybe Charlie Jacobs will give us an answer a week from today, next Wednesday, when the Bruins hold their end of season press conference with Charlie Jacobs, Cam Neely, and Don Sweeney. But retool to me implies a timeline of a year or two. If he's saying it's not a rebuild, to me that means he doesn't think this should take 4 or 5 years. So, yeah, Neely and Sweeney safe for now, but it does feel like there's a timeline on, hey, like sooner rather than later, we got to be back in the playoffs.
That's exactly right. And in this market with the Red Sox in town and the Patriots and the Celtics are obviously at the top of the food chain right now, being defending champions, and it's a very competitive landscape in Boston. Not one owner, not one franchise wants to fall too far behind. Well, I don't know. Maybe the Red Sox didn't care about it too much the last 6 years with the spending, but or lack thereof. But in Boston, teams want to compete with they want to keep up with the Joneses, and when you're the Bruins, especially domestically, hockey is probably third or fourth, probably fourth in popularity in the 4 major sports leagues. So
Yeah,
the
fourth, maybe even fifth, with soccer closing fast.
yeah, and then I mean then there's college football, college basketball, like domestically with popularity. So
Well,
I mean,
if you got college football's two. Like
yeah,
then
but
football takes the top 2 spots.
yeah, yeah, but I guess keeping it to the city of Boston, like the Bruins just don't want to fall competitively too far. So, um, yeah, there's no, even with all the selling at the deadline, there was no doubt in my mind that the Bruins were going to try to retool on the fly. Now, whether fans want them to rebuild and suck for multiple years, that is completely within the individual fan's right to feel that way. But I just know that ownership doesn't have the appetite for it. And Scott has sat here on the podcast before and said this could be a long-term rebuild if it's not done right. And if that's the case, I just think it's going to be because they weren't successful with the retool. Like, it's not because they're choosing to rebuild. So there's so much that needs to happen this summer. Very much looking forward to covering all of it. But yeah, like, ownership thinks that the quickest way to get back to the playoffs is to probably not disrupt too much in the management suite, because I don't know, they probably just feel like these guys, they have trust in these guys. Whether we as fans or media completely agree, it doesn't matter. It's what ownership thinks. So we can criticize them for thinking this, but it's what they think and it's what they're going to do.
Well, clearly in part of what Scott read from the Globe's article by Jim McBride, what he was saying when he said, he doesn't understand why people call for their heads. That means he's definitely not thinking the same way. Like he completely has trust behind those two. And we bring that up early, not just because it's the news of the day, but also because we had talked on a previous episode, on last episode, about rumors that a resignation was coming on Wednesday, and here we are. It's Wednesday right around noon that we're recording, and it doesn't seem like a resignation is coming, especially not from those 2 main guys, Neely and Sweeney. So, and to me, that makes a lot of sense from what we had heard, just that they were going to be the ones seeing through the second part of what happened this year, which the first part obviously being the selling and the getting draft capital, and the second part being the draft and the coaching search and everything with free agency in the off season. So it makes sense to me that when they were given the green light to do what they did with the selling, that they were going to always have that opportunity to finish the job of seeing through the draft and trying to put together a team for next season that is going to be hopefully a quicker bounce back than what the worst case scenario would be, which would be just you're looking at drafting top 5 again next year, right? So the goal from ownership and management is going to be, be a playoff team next year. Try at least be close to being a playoff team next year. My question to you guys is like, if they're gonna be if they're gonna be like nipping at the heels of, say, a wild card spot next year, do we think that that is like a sign of good progress? Or do we think that that just, they didn't want to be that this year, clearly. They could have been like the first team out of the playoffs. They could have been much closer to the playoffs. Instead, they sold and went the opposite direction with it. Like, do you think they'd be sellers again next year if they were just middling, like close but not 100% sure? Like, it's hard to say what the move would be next year if you're somewhere in the middle, just outside, like just barely outside, with a chance to move in. Yeah, what next year would look like, what the strategy would be. Would they then be making a push at the deadline if they were close, trying desperately to make it into the playoffs? Could be a different situation.
I mean, I think it would be, I think competing for a playoff spot and maybe having a chance to squeak in, to me, that's a step forward. I feel like I have maybe lower expectations for what next season could look like. In my mind, more realistic expectations, but maybe there are people who think they can be like a legit playoff team next year. I just think that's 2 years down the road. I just don't think they're doing enough this offseason. Yeah, I don't think they can do enough this offseason to call it like a top 5 team in the conference where you're safely in the playoffs. Like, to me, best case scenario is you're on the bubble and you're fighting to get in. Like, if we're using the Washington Capitals blueprint for their retool on the fly, they sold at a deadline. The next season, they clearly weren't a cup contender, but they squeaked in with a late push. And now this is the year where you start to think about contending. That is like best case scenario to me. So in the Bruins world, that makes next season maybe you squeak in, but you're clearly not a cup contender year. So that seems like realistic best case scenario to me. So I would consider that a step in the right direction. But if you have the mindset that this can go faster than that, then I guess you'd probably be disappointed if they're only a fringe team again.
Yeah, I would agree with Scott in the sense that it would be a step forward. And as far as the team's chances to be a playoff team next year, to be honest, I don't have enough information to go off of right now because so many things can happen. So, for example, I also feel like this Bruins team we've been watching, it's not as bad as what we all are witnessing right now because they've been without their top 2 defensemen combined now for a couple of months, and Lindholm's been out since November. So you go into next year with your top pair back, like your defense looks much different, but that's McAvoy and Lindholm coming back. In addition to them, I I I would be surprised if Swayman didn't have somewhat of a bounce back year. So he should be better, but let's hold judgment on that.
I mean, he better be.
Well,
I know we'll talk about it more and we'll talk about it a lot, but like that, it can't be somewhat of a bounce back. Like, he needs a complete turnaround.
but what I'm saying is, like, if you had to put money on it right now, like a $5 wager, you'd probably put money on him that he wouldn't have this bad of a year again, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he could. We don't, because what he's given us this year now is doubt. We now have doubt. But so let's just say Swayman's better. You have your top your top 2 defensemen back. Let's stick with the first thing that happens this summer, which is the draft. There's just about a 20%. Well, I guess we don't know yet because I have to see if they finish 29th and 28th. But there's going to be a 15 to 20% chance that the Bruins end up with a top 2 pick. They probably take Misa in that situation. So let's just see where they pick, who they take. If they draft Misa and let's just say he makes the NHL next year and is he in their middle? Like who knows what? So let's just see what the draft pick is, and if that draft pick has the potential to be in the NHL next year, right? So that's one variable we don't know. Okay, throughout the offseason, there are trades that could be made that we just don't know right now. Do the Bruins try to get creative and in doing so makes them enemies? And do they try to offer sheet somebody? I see Scott tweeted about Matthew Nyes is out there.
Yeah.
And
Chaos. Let's go.
And then Cooley with the Rangers. Do the Bruins try to do what St. Louis did this past summer to Edmonton, and maybe they try to offer sheet a team, a player from a team, and at worst, it just means that team has to pay more money for their player. Who do they get in free agency? Do any of these younger players step up? Does a Minton step up? Does Lysell step up? Like, there's just so many unknowns about this roster construction next year that I can't sit here and say that they can't turn it around, because they're going to be getting some important healthy bodies back, probably, hopefully, some increased performances from some reliable players. And then there's just players that aren't on the team right now that will become next October. So I just need to see it all play out.
And I heard people talking about this, like, because obviously we're up there with all the other reporters, and people are just having side conversations. What do you think? What do you think? Do you think they'd try this? Do you think they'd try that? Yesterday, one of the other reporters kept bringing up to me that he's like, what if they try to trade Korpisalo? Like, what if they tried to get rid of him and see what the goalie market bears out? Like, are people gonna overpay for a goalie this offseason? Take calls on that. Like, that, just a back and forth conversation of like, would they be better off keeping him or trying to move him, or just like, does DiPietro good enough to come back? Like, there's just so many different side conversations that you could have about pretty much every single player on this roster, whether they should, besides this, of the few that are very solidly not going anywhere and you don't want to go anywhere, there's side conversations to be had about a lot of the other pieces. Will they be here? Do they have value if you trade them? All sorts of different conversations going on. There's plenty of guys that were on the team this year that there's a conversation that's being had right now that the season's over. It's like, are they even going to get an offer extended to them? Right? Like Johnny Beecher. Is Johnny Beecher going to get an offer extended to him after this season? He was a healthy scratch the last game.
Last two games.
Yeah, and for good reason. Like, he didn't prove a whole lot this year.
Johnny Beecher had 1 goal in his final 73 games this season.
It's only 1 more goal than you did in that same stretch, Scott. That's crazy.
That's true. Yeah.
Wow.
And I definitely ate more popcorn than him.
You did. You did. By the way, a nice little autograph for Bridget's mantle. I don't know if you guys saw her on Twitter. Oh, there it is. Wow, that's so funny. Yeah, love that.
That's why I did it. I said, I got to update my background for the pod, and we'll see. Maybe I'll leave it up for Nesson next year when we.
Okay, can I ask? I need to ask an important question here, because when Bridget first asked me to autograph it, I did quick autograph, like 2 seconds. Can't read it, and then she told me to sign it like a check, and I'm like, that's not how celebrities sign autographs.
That's not what I said. I said, I'm putting this up in the background. Please do better.
Like, do you want genuine celebrity autograph, or do you want me to sign a check?
By the way, the back side of this has it on it, and it's hideous, and that's why I made him redo it. It was awful. And no one else is going to ask you for an autograph if you just make it.
People ask me for autographs all the time.
There wasn't even an S in there. I was like, this is just like a triangle. I don't know.
What was the message he wrote to you?
Keep on popping.
Keep on popping. Imagine if Scott did to Bridget what Tristan Cassis did. I don't know if you guys saw that Red Sox documentary on Netflix, but there's a scene where like he's walking into the clubhouse after a game, and this kid's like, Tristan Cassis, and he's like, what? And he's like, you're my favorite. Can I get an autograph? You're my favorite player. He's like, no. And he just like walks into the dugout. I'm like, oh, that's cool, man. Just, it's for the kids. It's for the kids. What are you doing?
Well, Scott couldn't. Was this the first autograph you signed, Scott?
No, I told you. I sign autographs all the time.
Okay.
People just walking up to me on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
People are outside Warrior when he's leaving practice, getting pictures with them and autographs.
I do. They're out there with their Bruins signs and jerseys, and I pull up and roll down the window. I sign stuff, and they're like, "Who the hell are you?"
Mm-hmm. Yep, he's that McLaughlin guy. And back, earlier this year, you could have pretended to be Mark, but or people could have pretended it was a.
I mean, with all the roster turnover, like I'm pretty sure I could convince people I'm a player.
Oh my god!
No one knows 60% of this team at this point, anyways.
Well, the shirt off the back ceremony after the game, I was dying because and this isn't even a fair one. Somebody opened their envelope and it said Parker Wotherspoon, and the guy just goes, "Who?" Like you can read his lips. Who? And I would understand if it was John Farinacci or like Frederick Burnett, like guys who literally played one game. Parker Wotherspoon has been on the team for 2 years.
Someone opens their card and it just says Scott McLaughlin, and Bridget turns around on the 9th floor. Scott's taking off his EEI polo and just signing it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what were we talking about, guys, before we got these mental images of Scott in our head.
Who's maybe gonna be gone next year?
Oh, Beecher. Yeah, Beecher has not been good. Beecher is. I mean, no disrespect to the player, but like, is anybody gonna lose any sleep if the Bruins don't, extend him an offer?
Well, and by the way, like we might know some of those. So we're recording Wednesday. Breakup day with players is on Thursday. We might know some of those. Like sometimes Don Sweeney will tell those guys that day, because not only are they all in meeting with media, but most of them have their one-on-one season ending meeting with Don Sweeney that day as well. So sometimes like a player comes into the room after talking to Sweeney, and at that point they don't have anything to hide. So like they'll just tell us like, yeah, they told me they're not extending an offer, or they'll say, oh, yeah, we both want to get something done, or there's mutual interest. So there could be news on some of these guys as early as Thursday.
Guys, can I bring up a thought that I kind of started to bring up last episode, and I've talked about it with you guys in the past, the notion of this back when the Bruins were like drafting 15th or 16th, but I just can't shake this. And at the trade deadline, bringing in Fraser Minton to the organization, and he's looked good in his brief stint in Boston. You can kind of see that high floor for him as like a reliable third line center. I can't shake this feeling that the Bruins are going to try to do something bold this offseason, and that might include packaging like a young player, like that. They might see redundancy, and the two names that keep coming to my mind that I just wouldn't be surprised if Boston tried to get creative and be bold and move on from, if it was the right deal, is like Mittelstadt and Patra. Like there's just something about the combination of those two players where they both have skill and they both can skate and they're both young. Obviously, Patra much younger than Mittelstadt, but I look at it and I just say, I brought up a little bit of redundancy at center. None of them are like top end centers, but there's just like a redundancy of like middle six caliber centers in the organization right now that are, and Patra and Mittelstadt, they're light. They're not the biggest players. I just can't shake the feeling that they might try to do something if it makes sense. Do you guys have any feeling of like something's got to shake with this roster that we might not be expecting?
Yeah, and I think a lot's on the table. So yeah, absolutely. Like exploring trades, especially as you said, where you have now a little bit of a logjam in terms of second and third line centers, or at least guys who project to be that. And we've already heard Don Sweeney and Nesson last week multiple times expressing frustration about overpassing and guys not being shot ready. And it's like, well, that kind of tells me, like, look at pass first guys and wonder what their futures are. And Mittelstadt and Patra are two pass first guys, like, so that would make sense. I would also, even along the same lines, like wonder about Pavel Zacha, who kind of fits that mold as well.
I don't think that he's going anywhere.
Now, I think Zacha, I would agree, probably not. He's had, 2 really good years here. This year, obviously, was a bit of a down year for him, but can help you on the wing in addition to center, which they need because they don't have enough wingers right now. So I think he probably stays, but he does also fit the mold of like that kind of player that Sweeney seems frustrated with, even though he's the one who's brought these guys in and put together a roster that has like 7 pass first guys.
Yeah, well, and this is another exercise we were going through with some of the other media members yesterday. It's like, okay, move Zaka here to the wing. That means you have all of these centers. Like, is Minton going to be there? Is Middlestat going to be there? And I just want to remind people, Middlestat has 2 years left on the deal that he came in on. So he is with the Bruins for the next 2 seasons. He's not one of those guys who came in as, an RFA at the end of the season or something like that. He has a legitimate contract left. So the reason why they went out and got him is they wanted, it seems like the attempt was to not just get back future like pieces for future draft picks and whatnot, but also somebody who could stick around and fill one of the holes. However, he does seem to be a little bit like weaker on pucks, and there's certain parts of his game that you're watching him, you're like, I don't know if he's fully meshed in yet. Like, I don't see a combination of him and X other player, or like, a full line of players that involves him, that I'm like, oh, I could see that being really successful. It's like, we're still looking for that. Maybe he ends up being someone they just took a look at from the deadline to the end of the season and decide they do want to try and move him for somebody else. But he's somebody they've been using on their first power play unit. He had a little bit of success when he first came, less so over the course of the last few weeks of the season. So his fit is not something that I think we've really seen solidify yet, which maybe creates a question mark. But they need, he would be one of their top 2 centers, right? So that's an important position.
You hope. Yeah, I mean, the problem is like he hasn't been playing with wings that might be on his line next year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a little bit of Pavel Zacha for a couple of games, but his most common line mates were Cole Koepke and Vinny Lettieri. Like, yeah, shocking that we haven't gotten a great read on what Casey Middlestat can be. Like, you had him playing with fringe NHLers. I mean, but let's be real. Like, what is that gonna teach you?
Bridget, I think you're muted.
I think we're gonna look back at this roster right here at the beginning of next season or partway through next season and go, holy, Jacob Lacko was on the second line at the end of the season last year, and like, just
I mean, they're just in ISA lineup mode to get through 82 games.
I know, but it's just like, there's gonna be a point in the future where we're looking at a legitimate NHL constructed roster and go, what the hell is this? Remember what this is just absurd.
I think another fun one would be to grab the opening lineup from this season back in October and compare that to next year's opening lineup. That's going to be a fun one, because now you're talking about a calendar year where there's probably going to be turnover of about 8 of 9 forwards, right? So,
well, here's one from October that I just found. Here's one from October. That
was convenient.
Yeah, I clearly have too much clutter going on, but this
Marchand, Charlie Coyle, Justin Brazeau, for those that are not watching on YouTube. First line, Marchand, Coyle, Justin Brazeau, Pavel Zacha, Elias Lindholm, David Pastrnak.
This is when they were listing the first line as the second line for some reason.
Right. Trent Frederick, Matt Poitras, Morgan Geekie, Kastelik, Beecher, and Koepke, which was playing like the first line at the time. So
very different.
It's very different. And as far as Middlestat goes, and again, I don't want this to be misinterpreted. I'm not calling for the Bruins to trade Matt Poitras or Casey Middlestat. There's just I have this feeling that like they might try to move on from some redundancy if it helps the team or help slot people into different spots or appropriate spots. But when it comes to Casey Middlestat in particular, it's going to be important to not just cast him away, right? You got him in the Charlie Coyle trade, along with a second rounder in Will Zellers, who is a very, very promising, fascinating prospect who's killing it in the USHL and is going to North Dakota next year. So, he's still at the very least probably 2-3 years away from even being on an NHL roster radar. But you also don't want to just, whatever you do with Casey Middlestat is a continuation of the Charlie Coyle trade tree. You understand what I'm saying? So if they can just, if they can turn Middlestat into something even better or better for the team with the Coyle trade, that's great. It's just something to keep an eye on. And there's just so, like Scott said, everything's on the table this summer. So it's just really tough to put a gauge on what this roster is going to look like. But they're going to try anything and everything, I would imagine.
Well, yeah. Well, what I think, looking at this roster from the last game of the season, it's like the bottom 3 left wings and the bottom 3 right wings, as the roster was, like that. None of that is like potentially going to even be there. Like you don't know if that's going to be your wingers on either side besides the top line.
So again, for those listening, it's Lauko, Koepke, Husadinov on the left, and then Lysell, Letary, and Farinacci on the right that she's talking about.
Yeah. And maybe Zacha becomes, left wing on the second line, but you're pretty much in need of potentially shaking up like 6 of your winger spots. If you're not sold on Lysell or any of those other guys that we just mentioned.
Right. And like this team's going to have some kids on it. It's just going to be a matter of how many, but yeah, like we talk about all these open roster spots. You can't fill them all in one summer. Like you can't sign 6 free agents. $27 million in cap space is nice, but that runs out pretty quickly. Like you got to sign Geeky to an extension. Mason Lohrei is going to get an extension as a restricted free agent.
Mm-hmm.
Probably lower money, but I guess we'll see what that looks like. You have to fill in the bottom of the roster. Like those guys, even if they're on the league minimum, that costs money. That's $800,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so like eventually you realize, okay, really we have enough money for 1 or 2 impact additions. Is what just like last offseason. Now you can't miss the way you did last time. You can't go spend, $13 million on Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov and get fairly minimal impact return on investment. Like that can't happen again. Your signings this offseason have to be more impactful, but no matter what, there's going to be openings. And, so whether it's Lysell, Patra, Minton, Husnudinov, absolutely include him as a young guy. He's still only 22.
Ryan, where did you put the shirt off your back you got from Husnudinov yesterday?
Well, I actually, it's hanging in my bedroom. My girlfriend's not too happy about it, but it's it is what it is.
Is it right alongside this? Like this looks at you guys while you sleep.
Yeah, it's I actually went to Walgreens and they got a nice little 4x6 frame and it's next to a picture of me and my family members and all that stuff. So it's it's looking good. It's looking good. Who was really pissed and jealous about that when I saw it was Wallstrom when he came over. He's like, why is there a picture of Kuzi on your? I'm like, he's like, where'd I'm like, Oliver, now's not the time.
I hate to tell you, but I've moved on.
Yeah. But yes, Scott, that's exactly right. They need younger internal options to step up and produce next year. That is absolutely part of the solution. And they shouldn't want that as part of the solution just to make the playoffs next year. That's the goal, right? The goal is to have younger players that you draft, develop, or maybe, get the rights to them and you can get them producing, on entry level deals and go from there. So that's definitely, this team cannot buy away their problems. Absolutely not. And they need to get creative, probably in the trade market. They might have to get bold, whether that's, trading away somebody that we are anticipating or offer sheeting or doing something. They're going to have to hit on a draft pick. We could talk about that. And yes, you need health. You need certain players to have a better year than they did this year. You need external help and you need some internal players that are younger that can produce. So they need a lot of things. It's going to take a little bit of everything.
And coaching staff turnover probably.
And that's another conversation that perhaps when we can, maybe the three of us and listeners can do some more due diligence on some names out there, and that could be something to talk about at another time, and maybe there'll be some insight from people in the organization. But one comment that I want to talk about from Jeremy Jacobs, or I'm sorry, Charlie Jacobs, his article that Scott referenced is they want to be back so bad to be competitive that when Scott says they can't miss if they spend again in free agency, there are a couple of players on the free agent market this coming summer that I don't think that risk is there. Mitch Marner's a name. I don't think you're signing Mitch Marner. Now, granted, you'll be making him the highest paid forward in hockey probably for a year or two. But if you go out there, Charlie Jacobs sounded like a guy that is like, we're ready to go big fish shopping if we can get somebody like Marner. If you get somebody like Marner, I don't think there's the risk of that player not panning out from a production standpoint. Outside of him, yes, there's risk with anybody. I think he's probably the only free agent that they could go after where I think it wouldn't be a question of, is this guy going to produce the way we think he's going to? So I could see Charlie Jacobs and the Bruins being hell-bent on bringing in Mitch Marner. Whether or not Mitch Marner wants to sign in Boston is another question. But I'd be interested to see how that pans out. But it sounds like ownership is desperate to get back to being competitive. That would be the most impactful forward addition and the most surefire forward addition. That would be costly. But if the player would want to come here, I think Boston would take him in a heartbeat and pay for him in a heartbeat as well.
You'd have to sacrifice, filling in more holes with filling in like one hole so much better than, you know what I mean? Like you'd sacrifice, you'd have to lean on some of the younger guys and guys like who's Nadine who you brought in the bottom six, and then just really hope that your top six that would now include Mitch Marner would be strong enough to really solve some of the major problems that you had. And my other thing is, and I'm sure that they would love to have Mitch Marner, his natural fit is a little bit like it's not a perfect natural fit, Scott, right? Like he wouldn't be with Pastrnak more likely, right? I would think he would be more.
Yeah, most likely those two are driving your top two lines. They're both staying at their natural position on right wing. We know Pastrnak is good enough to drive a line. We saw it, multiple years now.
We shouldn't have to question that one.
Yeah, but I guess Mitch Marner, like if you want to question it a little, he's always had either Austin Matthews or John Tavares as a center, which he's not going to have here, unless you also go and sign John Tavares. But I don't think you are. But I do think Mitch Marner is good enough to drive a line. And, you put him on your second line behind Pastrnak, and now you have almost, I won't say no matter what you put in around them, but almost no matter what, as long as you put representative players, like you have a pretty good top six because you have two stars.
But so Zacha, Middlestat, Marner would be the projection for that.
Yeah, so I mean, like
guys,
like I don't love that line because that's three pass first guys, but I'm not like Pavel Zacha and Casey Middlestat aren't stopping me from signing Mitch Marner. Like I'll glad if I need to move one of them and go find another shooter somewhere, I'll do that. Like Mitch Marner's the priority, and then if you have to move other guys around to, get different pieces around him, you do. But like I don't believe you sit here and say, well, we're not going to sign Mitch Marner because we don't know about the fit with Zacha and Middlestat. It'd be like, who gives a crap? Like you can just get rid of Zacha and or Middlestat, Mitch Marner's a stud. You're not, you fit pieces around him, not the other way around.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. And by the way, that would also disrupt Lysel's chances of being on the team next year because he's another right winger. So that's another right wing.
Well, who's their third line right wing
I
though?
mean, he could be if you want to throw him on your third line.
You
If you
know?
think he could fit a third line role, then yes. I mean, then there's plenty. There's certainly holes still left.
Yeah.
But people, when you talk about Fabian Lysell, they're like, no, he's not a bottom six guy. He's a top six guy. Blah blah blah. So he'd have to find a way to still be impactful on a third line if he was going to make the team next year. If in this hypothetical situation where Mitch Marner is your second line right wing.
Right. And I don't want to get too far ahead, but like I think like Fraser Minton is, if he's a third line center, like he's a young kid, like there could be potential to find a young pair there. Like we just never know. But here's the thing. Come free agency, we will know who the Bruins drafted, right? We'll know if they struck gold and got the second overall pick and took Michael Misa. And maybe they think Michael Misa can be an NHL player next year and see what I'm not anointing him right now to second line center or first line center in his first year if he even made the team. But I'm just saying, like,
Zaka Misa Marner.
Right, but exactly. But what that tells what I'm saying is by free agency,
you need to find another MM. Then you'd have the all M line: Mitch Marner, Michael Misa.
You could get Marat, but it doesn't his last name.
No, it's gotta be MM. We'll find him. We got also
M&Ms, the M&Ms.
Marat Musnadinov. We'll just legally change his name. Yeah, just legally change his name.
Yeah, actually, that's even a better nickname.
But by the time free agency comes around, the Bruins will know where they ended up in the lottery, who they drafted, is one of their current players more expendable now or tradable because you just don't know. And then maybe you try to make some room for, maybe you get people off your roster and maybe you try to bring in, maybe there's a center in free agency that they like. And in this, they've traded a Casey Middlestat and a spot's opened up, and maybe they bring in like I don't know. I mean, I'm not sitting here advocating that the Bruins go out and just pay for all the top guys in free agency, but some of the names in free agency at center are Brock Nelson, Sam Bennett. Who was the other one that I saw? Matt Duchene, John Tavares. Like, obviously, if you're gonna go for Marner, chances are, you're not gonna get the top center available too. I'm just saying there's too much roster movement that can happen between now and then. So we just don't know how it plays out. But I guess we'll see. There's a lot of options though. That's what I'm saying. I have no idea what this offseason is going to bring us.
A name I have kind of had my eye on, and he's a third liner, so it's the second tier. Like, this isn't going to be the top guy you sign, but I like Pius Suter, and I know like Bruins fans are probably done with Vancouver Canucks players, but I don't think he's going to cost a ton, and he can play center or wing, and I think he's just like a good, well-rounded player, and a little bit of that Swiss Army knife type of guy. Like if you went fairly big on your top signing, whether it's Marner or even a step below for Nick Ehlers, and then like Suter was the next guy after that, like that kind of approach makes sense to me. And Suter's still in his 20s. The veterans don't really make much sense to me. That just doesn't like align with your timeline. Unless it's someone on like a shorter term deal where, okay, we bring him in, and then if we're out of it next year, we can trade him, which is, when you're a retooling or rebuilding team, is something I think those teams should have in mind, because every year we see what the prices are at the trade deadline. So, like, just as an example, Kyle Palmieri was on a 1-year deal this past season. If you sign Kyle Palmieri to like a 1 or 2 year deal, I know like the instant reaction from Bruins fans would be like, that's weird. He's in his 30s. Why are they signing Kyle Palmieri? And it's like, well, if next year ends up being another retool year and you're out of the playoffs, guess what? You flip Kyle Palmieri at the deadline for a first or second round pick. Like, that's an easy deal to make because he still produces at a pretty good level.
And when Sweeney talked to Nesson a few games ago, he was asked about, bringing in a Foligno type guy. And he made a point to say, like, it's important for us to add some, I guess, like supplemental leadership outside of the group that they already have. So like outside of McAvoy and Pasternak, can you add on some veteran leaders that obviously more likely than not will fill in somewhere on the third or fourth line, plug in there. So yeah, definitely wouldn't rule that out as something that could happen in free agency. And I guess they could be part of a trade if the trade had, maybe a package deal for two guys this way, pick this, whatever. So yeah. And it also brings to mind the other conversation that we're going to be having this offseason, which is captaincy. Right. So it's coaching, captaincy, free agents, draft prospects, ping pong balls. There's just so much.
There is. I mean, like, this team could look very similar to the roster that we see right now, and there's just an influx of, they just go completely internal in the bottom six, and they bring in like one winger in the top six and bank on McAvoy and Lindholm getting healthy. Or, you could see them trade away Casey Middlestat, and maybe their plan is to go out and get Sam Bennett and Mitch Marner and have them on a second line with Pavel Zacha. Like, I have no idea what this team is going to do. I don't even know if the Bruins know what they're going to do, to be honest with you guys. So I guess we'll just have to, play it by ear. But yeah, it's definitely one of the more exciting off seasons in recent memory to cover, just because there's just so many unknowns. It's not very often that there was unknowns after the 22-23 season when Bergeron and Krejci retired. There was some unknowns this past off season, but the amount of roster turnover that we've seen this year and the amount of job openings is, it's crazy. So,
well, and just having a guaranteed top 10 pick and possibly a top 5 pick, I think I said the last pod, but that's something I'm legitimately excited about and talking about. And I mentioned this off the top, so I'll just bring it up now that this, I was even viewing it as okay, everyone still thinks there's a clear top 2. Matthew Schaefer, the defenseman, Michael Misa, center. That hasn't changed. But I kind of been viewing as okay, there's a group of 4 after that. 3 centers in James Hagens, Anton Frendel, Caleb Denwyer, and then the winger Porter Martone. And then a little bit of a drop off after 6. And just in the last 2 days, and this is going to happen, by the way, multiple times between now and the end of June, there's been a couple rankings that just immediately blur those lines. So Central Scouting put out their final rankings, and among North American prospects, they had Jake O'Brien, Brian's guy, ranked 4th. Every other ranking has had him, I don't know, anywhere from 8th to 12th, closer to 10. And now here comes a ranking that has him 4th out of North American skaters. Even if you think, oh, well, if they combine them, would Frendel be higher? It's that they have him ranked 5th, 6th at worst. So all of a sudden that makes you think wow, okay, forget O'Brien not being a reach at 7 or 8. Maybe he's not even a reach in the top 5. And then you see elite prospects. I saw so I think they're going to have one more final ranking after this, but they put out their April rankings, top 75 on Wednesday. They have Roger McQueen 5th overall. Roger McQueen, who's 7, 8, 9 in most rankings, concerns about his back injury. A lot of his production is coming against the worst teams in the WHL. There's some question marks there. It's skating, but elite prospects wrote in their brief write-up of him that he could have the highest upside in the whole draft if he reaches a ceiling. So it's all of a sudden it's okay, well, I was thinking, I don't, Roger McQueen probably more a 7 or 8. And now all of a sudden it's I don't know, maybe it's not crazy to take Roger McQueen in the top 5. Here's one of the most trusted sites for prospect analysis, putting him 5th overall.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have my personal wish list rankings yet, but what I can say is this. is that you have 6 center iceman prospects. You have Michael Misa, Anton Frundell, James Higgins, Jake O'Brien, Caleb Denwye, and Roger McQueen. Those 6 guys are all ranked between 2 and 10. I mean, you can cross-reference different sites, but they're all top 10 prospects. They're all ranked 2 through 10 because Michael Schaefer or Matthew Schaefer is the number 1 ranking. The lowest, Scott says the Bruins have a guaranteed top 10 pick. We now know it's a guaranteed top 7 pick. The Bruins are guaranteed a top 7 pick. When you consider the fact that a defenseman is going first overall, you should have a combination of those 6 guys available to you. It could be all 6, depending on if you win the lottery, or it could be 2 or 3. But they're all really good options. And Scott, to your point, I've heard the amount of people that I've heard just say this draft sucks and it's a 2-player draft, to me is just, it is so insulting to some of these top 10 prospects, and honestly pretty ignorant, because
I also don't think I've heard too many people refer to it as that.
I've seen a lot of it, and you see it online with fans. You see some media members, but what I'm saying is,
and I think what people mean by that is, like, obviously they're not saying only 2 players are going to be good NHLers. They're saying only 2 players are like legit top 5 picks in most years.
But again, who's to say? Like, the people that are saying this, Scott, aren't watching. I'm not even pretending that I am, but people are saying this that aren't watching these players. And what kind of annoys me is, like, can we just see how things play out? Because if there's a draft that doesn't have anybody labeled Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews, like, if there's not some generational player, it's like, oh, well, no. NHL GMs fuck up the NHL draft. How do media members and fans have these like, just these strong opinions months before a draft even happens? Most of the people haven't even watched these players, and I'm not saying I have, but I have been watching a lot of these prospects that we're talking about, and I can tell you this, that because the Bruins have a guaranteed top 7 pick and there's 6 centers in the top 10 rankings, the Bruins are going to end up with a damn good prospect and a very good NHL player, I believe. I'm not saying next year, but any one of those guys I just mentioned, I think are going to have very, very respectable NHL careers. And people are just so dismissive. It's like, let's just say that the ceiling for these guys is let's say Misa has a top center ceiling, and Denwye has a 2C ceiling. What's wrong with having a bona fide 2C for the next decade plus? Like, I just don't understand why people are so critical of a draft when they don't really know how these players are going to pan out. It's like,
well, and like, what can you do about it? Like, the Bruins, this is the year that they're drafting top 7, or maybe even higher. Like, what can you do? This is the draft that you have. You have to figure out who you want in the group. You can't defer to next year. You can't change that. So that's just
right.
How
and you have to hit. So, like, whether it's an especially strong draft or not, like, whoever they draft with this pick has to be an impact player. Not right away, obviously, but 2-3 years from now. Like, I know people criticize Bruins development, but, like, they can develop bottom 6 forwards and third pairing defensemen, and they find a lot of players that they turn into passable NHLers. You can't, unless you get lucky, like, you can't turn second, third, fourth round picks or college free agent signings into first line players if they're just not talented enough. Like, guys have a ceiling, and they have not had many prospects who have the ceiling of a top line player. Like, they just haven't been in position to take those guys. This pick has that ceiling.
right.
And Brian, like you said, like, the floor for whoever you take with this pick is, like, they better at least be a good second liner. They're all going to have the upside to be a first liner, and obviously you have to do everything you can to try to get them there. But yeah, like, it can't be a miss, right? Like, this guy can't be solid third line center. He certainly can't be a straight up bust where he's not even in the NHL. Like, you have to hit on an impact player because you just haven't had those. And the only way to build, to retool in the NHL is like some of it has to be replenishing from within. Like, you need young impact players. You can't just keep turning to free agency and trades every time you need a top 6 forward. You run out, as we've seen, like you run out of cap space, you run out of draft capital, it sets you back. Like, you gotta have ideally multiple players from within pushing for those jobs, but certainly when you have a top 5 or 7 pick, like that kid has to turn into one of those players.
Yeah. And again, if people in the know, people whose job it is for a living is to scout these potential prospects, if they deem that it's not a deep draft, okay. I mean, they could still be wrong. I mean, what Tampa Bay took Kucherov and Point and Sorelli and all these other guys that are on their cup rosters over the years. These guys were outside the first round. So did people call those deep drafts, or did it just like, you don't necessarily know, because people, again, these kids are 18 when they're drafted. Sometimes you don't develop until you're in your early 20s, your body. So I just think if people want to call it not a deep draft, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, it's a deep draft, because I don't know for sure. But when people just completely disrespect top 10 prospects, saying it's a 2-person draft or it's not really a good draft, it's like these guys are all, point per game to point and a half per game players in their respective leagues, just like every other list of top 10 prospects, aside for some generational players that are like 2 points per game. So I just don't know why people are so pessimistic on the other top 10 prospects besides Misa and Schaefer. It's like, okay. So I guess we'll find out, but I'm pretty excited for the Bruins to get any one of these guys, because it's a hell of a lot better of a prospect than they've had in their system for a long time. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and we're going to try to get some draft experts, prospect experts to talk to us, to ask questions, people who have been paying really close attention to this. We've had Chris Peters on in the past from Elite Prospects. He could be somebody that we talk to again.
He's flow hockey.
Oh, he's flow hockey. We could probably get someone from Elite Prospects on as well, because I'm interested to hear from people who've actually spent this entire season while we had our eyes on the NHL and college hockey, guys who had their eyes on some of the other leagues we weren't able to watch a whole lot, and have their own comparisons and insight on skill sets and fit and different things like that. So that's certainly, we're interested in that, and in getting some guests on that could help give our listeners more information than we can. We can go through all the information that we can gather, but we've not been to, besides James Hagen's, like, I don't think we've seen any of the others in person, right, guys?
Yeah,
I
think that's true. Yeah.
So.
But I am flying out to all parts of Canada over the next few weeks to see as many guys as possible.
But by the way, that was like another tip off that Don Sweeney wasn't going anywhere. He's been spotted in a bunch of Canadian junior rinks over the last couple of weeks. So he's like, he was at one of Roger McLean's games. He was at one of Caleb Denwayer's games. So he's been out there like, obviously the Bruins have scouts at all these games, especially now that the CHL is in the playoffs. But he's been at some of these in person, getting firsthand viewings of these guys that obviously he's going to have an opportunity to draft one of them.
Well, everybody online keeps telling me, Scott, that he's going to, fuck up a top 5 or 7 pick by reaching to probably the second round to get somebody. So I don't know why he's scouting these top prospects that are going to potentially fall to his lap. I don't know why he would pass on obvious prospects, but maybe he'll surprise us. Maybe he will.
And obviously he's all, like, a lot of the Bruins, including Sweeney, have seen a lot of Hagens, just as we have. The Bruins already had prospects on BC with Letourneau, Yelvik, Gasso. So they had someone at like almost every BC game, certainly every BC home game. And a lot of times it was Don Sweeney himself. So they will also have already an extensive scouting report and analysis of Hagen's.
Yeah,
I do.
easy to scout a guy that's playing, 15 minutes down the road for most of his home games, and even the away games are at like Northeastern and BU. Like they're easy to get to. And obviously Sweeney will be watching the Providence Bruins playoffs as well, because there's still some internal guys to look at as well. Yeah, he's still going to be busy over the next few weeks because
I mean, that's going to be like the busiest. This is going to be busier than the season. Like,
yeah,
we're going to be incredibly busy. Like,
Well,
this is it. Like, this is the hardest part of the year, really. I mean,
during the season, it's more of like an assessment. It's like he's just sitting there like taking notes, and now it's time for him to go like use them and get ready to make the next moves.
Well, I think for Bruins fans that want Sweeney fired right now, I got bad news for you. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do believe adamantly that if he doesn't turn it around and that this retool isn't successful and they do miss the playoffs next year, I think he will be fired. So I think he has to. I think he has to get this team back to where ownership wants them. And if he doesn't, then I do think the Jacobs will sit there and say, okay, Don, we think highly of you. We gave you an opportunity to retool after one bad year, and it just didn't work. And now we have to move on. I think that's what's on the line for him this next calendar year.
Yeah, and something else to point out here, and this came from Pierre LeBrun, who kind of just dropped it in, but I don't think this was known, is that Don Sweeney is entering the final year of his contract. He's got next season is his last season. And so I saw people, speculating, like, would they let him go through the year as a lame duck GM or without an extension? To which I would remind people, the Bruins have already done that once. 2021-22, Don Sweeney went through that whole season without a contract beyond that year. And they finally signed him to an extension after the regular season was over. And I remember Cam Neely at the time, and I might have even asked it. I don't remember who asked it, but he was asked, like, why didn't you sign him to an extension sooner? Like, why didn't this get done during the year? And he said, honestly, I wanted to see how the season went. So he already did that once, where it was, there's certain things I need to see to sign you to an extension, and let's see if they happen. So, I'll be interested when we get a chance to talk to Neely next week. I'll be interested if someone asks, if it's me, like, what are, in your mind, like, what are the priorities that have to happen over the next year? Because if Neely gives some specifics, there's your blueprint of what he is expecting from Don Sweeney. So obviously hitting on this pick is a big part of it. But what else? What else does he say?
But hitting on the pick, you might not know in a year. So
no, but you can have an idea, because one of the things that happened during the 21-22 season, or you can at least have a good feeling, because they drafted Fabian Lysell in 21. And then a year later, after his Fabian Lysell season in the WHL, Lysell had a great season in the WHL, and at that time looked like a real legit prospect. So 1 year later, you were feeling pretty good about that. The other key thing that happened was Don Sweeney traded for Hampus Lindholm. And if you remember, like, for years late in Chara's career, Neely kept talking about, like, we need a left shot all around defenseman to be Chara's replacement. And it was like, it felt like every deadline, every offseason, he'd mentioned this. And then in his mind and in Sweeney's mind, they finally got it that year, the 2022 trade deadline. So that's what I mean by, like, ears open for what Cam Neely is saying is the priorities, because that's what Don Sweeney is going to get judged on.
Yeah. And by the way, just because you mentioned Zdeno Chara, like, maybe we figure out what his defined role is.
Yeah.
I saw him yesterday. He was just walked through the locker room after the game. He's impossible to miss. All right. You see something out of the corner of your eye that's like way up here, and there's no other person that's this tall. And I'm just like, Oh, is that Chara? Oh, yep, that's Chara. Yeah, he's here. So he's around. We'll see maybe if he gets a bigger role, or we at least figure out what his role's definition is. Because he could be somebody that is maybe in the mix for coaching or scouting or anything like that positions this upcoming off season.
Player development, yeah, like
Yeah, I'm curious if somebody asked about their priority in the draft as well. I think it's fairly obvious to most people that their biggest need is up the middle, right? For but you never know. Okay, so you guys will talk to him, or Scott, you'll talk to him next week.
Yeah, I should be able to.
Player breakup day is tomorrow, the 17th. Is that true?
Yep.
So we'll have some reaction to that when we record next on Friday. So Bridget and Scott, if you guys don't have anything else, we can probably, all set.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you all very much for listening, and we will talk to you on Friday. Hey guys, thanks for watching this Skate podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.